computer.
Okay. So we're back at Cracks in Postmodernity with a very special guest who needs no introduction, Father Jim Martin. We're very happy to have you with us.
My pleasure.
So I want to start by talking about your new book, which just came out last month, I believe, a few weeks
Yes,
ago.
last month, February something, early February.
And this is your first actual memoir telling about your life story, your early years. I'm curious to know, I mean, given all the different topics that you've written about, why did you want to write a memoir and why at this point in your life?
I did one 25 years ago that was more of a straight vocation story,
Okay.
like entering the Jesuits, called In Good Company. But yeah, this is the first one in a long time, and the first really full one. I had finished a book a couple years ago called Come Forth, about the
Hmm.
raising of Lazarus, which is not exactly like, a laugh riot.
Yeah.
So it was pretty serious. And then the one before that was called Learning to Pray. It was also, fairly
Hmm.
serious. And I started writing stories about my summer job experiences when I was growing up in the 70s, mainly, just to kind of, have something that would be light and funny. A lot of my friends have enjoyed these stories, and I thought, why not get them down? And when I pitched it to my publisher at Harper One, she said, well, you can't just write a book about your funny summer jobs. And I said, well, why not? And she said, people are going to want more from you. So I thought we could turn it into a book about work in general. That's work in progress, the different works that I had, and then turn it into kind of a vocation story, right? So it functions as, first half is really about finding work, kind of these crazy summer jobs, and then finding God.
Hmm.
So that's how it came to be. It came to be after these serious books. I wanted something a little light.
Hmm. So here's the book that was just published a couple of weeks ago. So as you just said, you talk a lot about some of your first jobs growing up. And first thing I wanted to kind of point out is that you talk a lot about the spirituality of work and how it played a role in, your own spiritual life, the discovery of your own vocational path. And I found that to be reassuring because I feel like too often, I mean, priests, but also Catholics in general, don't talk very much about spirituality of work, which, I mean, personally, I think is a central part of our faith as Christians. I mean, Jesus had a job as well,
Sure.
just like all of us. And that, I don't know, I mean, I feel like there's this risk of creating this dualism between our work and our spiritual life, when in reality, they're not separate things. They're very much intertwined. Um, but also that like you talk a lot about the mistakes you made in your first job, some of which were kind of embarrassing, but that, like you really learned from these mistakes. So I don't know. I mean, why is it that you think that some of us are kind of, I guess, hesitant to really confront our own mistakes? Why is it that we have this kind of temptation to cover over them and just show, you know, what's perfect for the resume, what looks good on paper?
I guess just human nature. I mean, we are, I think, in some ways, prideful, right?
Mhm.
That's a part of all of us. There's a certain degree where you need to be proud of who you are, right? But for me, certainly, it was an inability to be able to say, I can't do this, I don't understand this. And it was, I say in the book, it was almost a kind of visceral reaction when I was young, not knowing how to do something, not knowing how to use this industrial dishwasher when I was a dishwasher, or, caddy, that's another sort of
Yeah.
mishap that I had. It was really embarrassing. And I think there was something about being a boy or a young man in those days and trying to be like, sort of cool and seem like you're on top of things,
Mhm.
that sort of played into that as well. But I think it's kind of human nature. We don't want to be seen as less than or ignorant or somehow wanting. But it's essential, as I say in the book, you have to be able to say, I don't know how to do this, right? To be able to
Mhm.
grow, to be able to just do the job. Um, and it took me a while. It really took me a
Yeah.
while to get over that sort of, as I said, almost physical reaction to admitting that I didn't know how to do something.
And ultimately, we don't learn anything if we're
Yeah,
too busy trying to
right.
avoid making mistakes, both in terms of like our actual work, but also in the spiritual life, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, the spiritual life is also a process of, trial and error, right? Help me with this, help me to pray, right?
Mhm.
Help me to understand how to live out my spiritual life, whether in a religious community or an institute or, as a lay person or married or whatever. And we learn from the saints and we learn from Jesus, of course, but we learn from people who are just practitioners. I mean, one of the jobs that I had was as a caddy,
Mhm.
and I didn't know how to golf. My older cousin taught me a little bit about golfing, and I reflect in the book that if I'd asked some of the caddies a little bit about golf, they probably would have been flattered to be asked, but I
Mhm.
didn't because I was kind of too proud. So I really had to get over that. And that's one of the themes of the book, learning to ask for help.
Mm. So you worked various jobs from your, teen years up until now. And being a priest it is a job. It
It
is a
is.
form of work.
Hmm.
What does it mean to you? What does your work mean to you as a priest? What is your work as a priest? How would you even put that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's different than obviously being a busboy or a dishwasher or a caddy, which I didn't feel was a calling. This I feel is a calling, right? Vocation means to be called. And so it is a job, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
do work, and I come to work here every day at America Media.
Mhm.
And there are tasks involved, with being a priest, but it's much deeper. It's who I am, right? So this sort
Mhm.
of flows out of my Jesuit vocation. And it flows out of, the way that God made me. So I don't see it as just something I do, and certainly not for pay, because I don't get paid anyway. So it's more of a part of my identity and part
Mhm.
of who I am as a person, which is
Yeah.
very comforting because you know that what you're doing flows out of the call that God has given you, and it can still can be more satisfying in that way.
Yeah, and I think this applies to every job, every
Mm,
career path, because I don't know, I mean, if you treat your work as something that's given to you by God, as a task that's meant to be fulfilled for the sake of, for your happiness, but also for
hmm
the common good, I mean,
hmm
you'll treat your work very differently from if it's just, a means to an end, a way to pay the bills.
Yeah, and I think there's different levels. There's the vocation originally to be who you are, right?
Hmm.
Just the person you're called to
Yeah.
be, your personality and your loves and your likes. Then there's the career, right? The path that you have. And then there's the individual job. And one of the things I say in the book was I had a great deal of sympathy for people who weren't able to fulfill their vocations. I
Hmm.
worked on a assembly line in a factory, and
Yeah.
I doubt any of these people would have said, "This is what I was born to do." They did it to support their families and to contribute to the common good. But one of the challenges is what happens when you don't feel like that you can fulfill or live out your vocation.
Hmm.
And that's a tough thing for a lot of people. That's where I think probably most people in the world are. If you're poor, you're
Hmm.
indigent, you're in an underdeveloped country. I doubt that most people are thinking, I really love, kind of picking through a trash
Yeah.
heap, right? So
Mm.
that's a challenge for a lot of people. But the question is, can you at least start um, understanding your vocation to be who you are,
Yeah.
even if your job doesn't exactly reflect what you
Mm.
think you should be doing?
Yeah, and I mean, I want to tie this back into what you were saying before. As a young man, it was
Mm,
very important to you for you to have these jobs, to learn from the mistakes. And because it makes me think of, I don't know, like I see how, especially a lot of young guys today struggle because I think it's hard to be a young man in general
mhm.
today for various reasons, but also to find meaningful work because it just seems like more and more as society's progressing you have these high-paying jobs, tech jobs, corporate jobs, engineering, whatever it may be. And there are fewer and fewer, I would say, normal jobs. When you have gig labor, you have these part-time positions. And I don't know, I have a lot of young guy friends who struggle because they're not those types of go-getters who are going to work in a corporation. And it really, and in addition to like taking an economic toll, I see spiritually like as you say in the book that work gives you dignity, and when you don't have meaningful work you lose that sense of dignity, you lose that sense of self-worth, the sense that you're useful in some way. So I don't know, I mean, I wonder what advice would you have for not just young guys but any young people who are struggling to find meaningful work in this economy, like how do you start to recover your sense of dignity?
Well, it's funny you should ask. I was just giving a talk to a group of students at Jesuit High School, Jesuit College out in California,
Hmm.
LMU,
Yeah.
and it was a course about morality, and there were a lot of business students there who were
Mm.
asking me that question. And I struggled with that as a young man. When I was about 25, 26, I had been working at GE
Hmm.
after
Oh.
graduating from the Wharton School of Business. And I just thought, this isn't for me. And what it took was someone to ask me, what do you really want to do? I mean, everybody has to
Mm.
eat and support themselves, right? So we all can't have jobs that are perfect. But I think when it is so in conflict with your fundamental desires and your values, that's where you really have to say, what am I doing?
Yeah.
And it may mean taking a salary cut, right?
Mm.
For me, it meant just leaving the corporate world completely. But I do want to say, business is a real vocation for a lot
Sure.
of people, and they contribute to the common good, right? And I have a lot of friends at GE, who spent their whole lives at General Electric and, did wonderful work and all that. But it just wasn't for me. And so I think the question people need to ask themselves is, what am I made for, right?
Hmm.
And what am I good at, right? And who am I and who am I meant to be? It's challenging though. I think it takes young people, not just young men, but young people a while to find that.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of pressure also on college grads to sort of know exactly what they want to do.
Mm, mm,
And which, we know that people change careers two or three
sure.
times. So, but the question is, what gets me up in the morning? What am I excited about? What am I
Yeah.
passionate about? What am I good at? Not simply, what's going to be the highest paying job.
Yeah. And it comes back to this question of vocation. I mean,
Hmm.
if what gets you up in the morning isn't the sense that I'm called to live
Hmm.
for something greater, then you're probably not going to be very happy.
Well, there's going to be people that are going to be better at it than you too.
Sure.
One of the things that struck me when I was in like 26, 27 and thinking about the
Mm,
Jesuits was that I was working with people who loved business. They loved reading the Wall Street Journal and
yeah.
Forbes and Fortune magazine. And I remember saying to two of my roommates, like, how can you read that stuff on the weekend? They're like, I love it. And I
Yeah.
thought, something's wrong. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm supposed to love it too, and I didn't. And to be able to admit that to yourself, I think is an important step.
Yeah. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about one of my favorite books that you've written that I think might be one of your most underrated books, Between Heaven and Mirth.
Oh, okay.
Um, we talk a lot about humor. We talk a lot about, we often cite Dorothy Day when she talks about the duty of delight, how,
Hmm.
especially people of faith, we can't afford to be serious all the time. Primarily because we're not God. We can't take ourselves that
Sure.
seriously. But also because I don't know. I mean, it makes life more joyful. And I think you articulated it very well in Between Heaven and Mirth. But I mean, if you could just say it in a nutshell, I mean, what does humor mean to you in your spiritual life? Why is it so valuable to you?
Yeah, so the subtitle of the book is Why Joy, Humor, and Laughter Are at the Heart of the Spiritual Life.
Hmm.
And first of all, joy, I mean, that's the end result,
Yeah.
right? I mean, Jesus comes to bring us joy.
Hmm.
The resurrection is a joyful time.
Yeah.
Humor, I think, enables us not to take ourselves too
Yeah.
seriously, right? I always point out to people that Jesus had a sense of humor. Now we can look at that in terms of the parables and some of the sayings that he had, which
Yeah.
in first century Galilee and Judea would have been seen as laugh out loud funny, but also he's a human being.
Yeah.
He's fully human, fully divine. So he has a fully human sense of humor. We tend
Hmm.
to forget that. We see all these pictures of Jesus kind of dour. And I think laughter is just part of the human condition and kind of lightens things. So it's really underappreciated. I think it's underappreciated mainly because of the way we see Jesus, right?
Hmm.
There, Jesus weeps at the death of his friend Lazarus. He doesn't, doesn't laugh. We don't see him laughing.
Hmm.
I mean, there's some jokey things in the Gospels. And the saints are portrayed
Yeah.
as really dour, whereas most of them, when I was doing my research for this book, were pretty funny and lighthearted and tons of saint jokes that I could tell.
Yeah.
And they had a great sense of humor.
What's your favorite funny saint story or saint joke?
I would say when John the 23rd was asked how many people work in the Vatican, do you know this one?
I've heard it. I
Yeah,
forget the
and
punchline.
half of them.
Ah, yes, that
And
was it.
he was also, someone also said to him, Holy Father, I understand that in Italy, things are, the Vatican, because it's in Italy, things are closed in the afternoon and people don't work. And he said, no, no, things are closed in the afternoon. People don't work in the morning. Now
Yeah.
I used that joke. I was on Vatican radio about 10, 15 years ago when this book came out, and they said, what's your favorite, joke from a saint? And I said this about the Vatican, and I realized I was on Vatican radio. There was this kind of dead silence. No, he
Yeah.
was Saint Philip Neri was known as the humorous
Yeah.
saint. There's
He
he,
shaved half of his
he make
beard to
people
make
laugh.
people
Yeah, he
laugh.
walked around with
Yeah.
a pillow on his head.
Yeah.
Um, but even in the Gospels, one of the stories I like to tell is when Jesus says to the Pharisees, "You
Mhm.
strain out a gnat and you swallow a camel," we think, well, okay, that's interesting and
Sure.
kind of a vivid metaphor. But camel and gnat in Aramaic are galma and gamla.
Okay.
So he's making a little wordplay, right?
Yeah.
Which is funny, right? And people would have remembered that. The other thing about humor is that it's memorable. So if he tells a funny story, people would remember it. And he was obviously pretty good judge of character and pretty
Yeah.
good judge of what would work. So yeah, we have to get back to Jesus himself being humorous and the saints as well, and then we can kind of appreciate it more.
My favorite Jesuit joke,
Sure.
there are many of them,
I
as
know.
we know, has to do with the novena.
Yes, I know that
Okay, I
one.
forget how it starts. I think it's
It's
when
a
somebody asks these
yes,
priests to pray a novena for
yes,
them, right?
yes.
That's how
The a man comes to a Dominican convent and
yes,
says, "Would you pray novena that I get a Lexus car?"
yes.
And the Dominican says, "What's a Lexus?" And he says, "It's a really top of the line car." And the Dominican says, "I'm not praying a novena for that." So he goes to the Franciscan parish and asks the same question.
Yeah,
The Franciscan says, "What's a Lexus?" And of course, he tells the Franciscan it's a wealthy car. And the Franciscan says, "No way, I'm praying for
yeah.
that." And he goes to the Jesuit parish, of course, and says, "I would like a Lexus." And the Jesuit pastor said, "Well, that's, good for you. That's a great car." He said, "Would you pray a novena that I get one?" And he says,
What's a novena?
"Right."
It's a good one.
Yes.
The version I heard, I think it was a BMW, but
Yeah,
all the
okay,
same,
yeah.
all the same.
Right.
So no, but I mean, as much as you say, humor is essential to the spiritual life. There's a time to laugh, there's a time to weep, there's
Hmm.
also a time to be serious because I don't know, I mean, as we see in the Gospels, Jesus had to correct people's sins. He had to, he had to tell people like it was. There's a time and place for
Sure.
everything. And I think it's for some people, it's hard to find where is that line. I think, like I said, some people are self-serious all the time. Some people take nothing seriously. And I mean, as we know from your work, there are some topics where, that mean very much to you. So you are very serious. You don't equivocate. Other times when you're joking, how do you navigate that line?
And that's an interesting question. I think the challenge is more that people think that the spiritual life in general has to be serious.
Hmm.
So I think in
Okay.
their daily lives, I'm not a psychologist, but
Yeah.
most people know, when it's appropriate to be funny and not funny,
Hmm.
right? I think when it comes to spirituality, people think it has to be always and everywhere sad. I mean, one of the reasons I wrote this book on joy, humor, and laughter was that there was so little written about it. And if you go to a bookstore or if you go online and you look under spirituality and death or
Hmm.
sadness or suffering, lots of books,
Yeah.
right? The spiritual, we used to publish articles in America constantly about, my brush with death or my brush
Yeah.
with illness. Joy is not a
Hmm.
whole lot. It is as if it's not important or it's just, well, of course, everyone's joyful. There's not much to say about it. So I think again, to recover it in the spiritual life, so you have to be very
Hmm.
careful. You can't, not every
Yeah.
homily can be jokey.
Sure.
But on a retreat, for example, right, can you be playful with the retreatant? Some people would think, well, you should do that, right? Because it's
Mm.
it's supposed to be serious. So I think that's the challenge. And again, it gets back to how we imagine Jesus and how we understand him. Because if we're trying to pattern our
Yeah.
lives after him, if we see Jesus as always dour, and really if the only image of Jesus we have, or the main image is Jesus on the cross,
Yeah.
then in a sense it's almost offensive,
Hmm.
right? To picture him smiling or laughing.
And it makes me think of, I mean, Pope Francis's first, was it exhortation, apostolic exhortation,
Hmm.
was Evangelii
Yeah.
Gaudium, the joy of the gospel,
Hmm.
which, I mean, all the discourse over the Francis papacy after he passed, I feel like people always ignored that that cornerstone of his papacy. I mean, for me, it impacted me very much. Really shaped my spiritual life, my vocational path in many ways. But I feel like no one really talks about it. They
I
talk
think
about the hot button
I
things.
think you're right. I think that's the key to his papacy,
Yes,
really,
yeah.
that evangelicality. But also, I found that with Francis, who I admired very much, and the few times I was with him one-on-one,
Hmm.
was very funny. I mean, he was
He
funny,
seems, yeah,
funny
seems like
and
it.
playful and lighthearted. And sometimes he would say things to me. We spoke through a translator
Yeah,
because my Spanish stinks and his English wasn't good.
yeah.
And he would sometimes say to me, "Oh, I think I'm scandalizing the translator." But I think one of the things that I noticed was I think his lightheartedness, right, as opposed to Benedict, who, very holy man in his own way, but different personality.
Sherman,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
right. And even John Paul, who was lighthearted and could
sure.
joke, but, a
His
little bit
way.
more serious, just different personalities, holy in their own way. I think in a way it somehow worked against him because people said, well, he's just frivolous or silly or
Oh,
not serious and not
okay.
intellectual.
Mm,
And again, he wasn't a philosopher like John Paul or a theologian like
sure.
Benedict, but he was a smart guy. And sometimes I think that frivolity, which I think is human, and which endeared him to some people, made him, in a sense,
Yeah.
less than for other people. He should be more serious as Pope.
Yeah, but I mean, the message of Evangelii Gaudium is so essential because I don't know. I mean, I see so many Catholics who just are not very happy people because, again, like they're whatever issue it is that they take seriously, like they do it to the point that they're just not happy. And I'm like, why would anyone want to be Catholic
I
if that's the way you're
agree.
gonna walk around?
When I was a Jesuit novice, the superior general of the Jesuits, Peter Hans Kolpenbach, came to our novitiate in Boston. This is 1988, 89. And we novices were tasked with asking him one question apiece. So I
Mm,
thought all like the whole week about my
yeah.
one question. And he came and I said to him, Father General, what's the best way to increase Jesuit vocations, right? That's a big question. And I thought he'd say, oh, we have to advertise more. We have to
Mm,
do more of this in school. I'll never forget it. He said, live your own vocation joyfully.
yeah. Yeah,
It attracts. Who would want to join a group of kind of grumpy people? But you're right.
exactly.
I think too many Catholics give off that sort of aura of being angry or judgmental
Yeah.
or just kind of sad or depressed or grumpy. And
Yeah.
that's not appealing.
And I mean, the other side of this kind of self-seriousness, and again, like taking yourself so seriously that as if like you think you're God, that you think
Yeah,
everything's in your hands, is that I see that the way this plays out for a lot of American Catholics is this tendency to like politicize everything within our faith or to prioritize political issues over
sure.
the faith itself. I mean, I know a lot of people who like their politics comes first, and that determines the way they look at their faith.
Well, that's too bad.
And it's the wrong way to do it, but it's also sad. And I mean, I always think back to I think it was the 2020 DNC where you said an opening prayer, I think it was.
Hmm.
And you did something that shocked a couple of people. Because in the opening prayer, you did, among listing several groups of people you wanted to pray for, you did list the unborn.
Hmm.
And it pissed off people on all sides of the
Hmm.
aisle. But I was very relieved when I saw that because it was a reminder that faith comes first. Faith determines our politics, not the other way around. Why is it? I mean, I think in America we struggle with this. I'm sure other Catholics elsewhere struggle, but why do you think we've ended up in this place?
That's, I don't know is the answer, which is
Yeah.
not an answer you hear from a lot of people on podcasts. It might be poor catechesis,
Mm,
right? It might be people who are finding the gospel is difficult, right? Because it's difficult to really reach out to people on
sure.
the margins. So it's easier to just be political, right? And to
Yeah.
say that, my views on these things are Republican or Democrat. Whereas, the Catholic Church is very hard for any one person to kind of
Mm,
embody,
yeah.
right? We don't have political candidates who embody like the full pro-life,
Sure.
push of the church. And gosh, I don't know. I think the gospel's kind of hard, right? It's hard to really reach out to people who are different than you are, which is what Jesus asks
Mm,
us. It's hard to care for those who are on the margins, whether they're unborn or LGBT people or migrants and refugees or the
mm,
poor, people who are, in danger of being euthanized, right? So
yeah.
that's hard for people. And maybe because we're Americans and we've been told that you can only be on one side or the other,
Mm,
it makes it more difficult. And then maybe there's cultural things. I think if
sure.
you say, I am for both of these things, right, which I often remind people, right, it's just hard for people to take in. And
Yeah.
I frankly don't understand why that is.
Yeah, and I mean, but one of the other ways this plays out, I think, is the infighting within the church.
Yeah, which is horrible.
Yeah, I mean, it's diabolical in the true
Yeah.
sense of the word. I mean, it's divisive, which is the opposite of what we're supposed to be.
Hmm.
And I don't know. I mean, I think about the fact that like we create these factions within the church. I'm on this side, you're on that side, especially here in the US. Um, and I don't know, like to me that is a scandal because I have my opinions. But I recognize that if I'm one in the body of Christ with this other person who I may not totally agree with, that takes priority. I mean, I may not agree with everything you say or everything you write, but we're part of the same body, like we're in communion. So like there's room for our disagreements, but there's something greater than that that unites us. Again, I'm afraid that we've lost sight of that because we want to hide in these little factions that we've created, you know.
I think you're right. It's kind of shocking to me, really. And I think Leo actually is doing a good job of trying to bring, I don't want to say sides, but trying to bring the
Mm,
different parts of the church together. I
yeah,
think it's striking that he talks about unity a lot. His motto, as you know, is in the one we are one, in Jesus,
yeah.
we are one. Um, but it is, and it's kind of a scandal. I I think the personal demonization is difficult to for people, on the outside to
Yeah.
see and say, what is, as a friend of mine said, it's see how they shove one another, right?
Mm,
It's not a good
yeah.
it's not a good evangelization strategy. Even if you look at it just practically speaking, it is not helpful in evangelization. And it really makes people feel other.
Yeah.
It's such a surprise because Jesus is all about creating an us, creating an inclusive world and community and
Mm,
creating, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, creating a new family, right?
yeah.
Jesus is always who brothers and sisters and who are my brothers and sisters? And we're supposed to be brothers and sisters. And even if brothers and sisters quarrel, we're still in the same family.
Yeah.
But it's really shocking the way that so many Catholics judge and particularly say, you're not a good Catholic or you're not even
Mm.
Catholic.
But I'm curious if you've had the opposite experience of someone who maybe like in a more political, ideological way is different from you, sees things different from you, but that you have a close bond with or who has reached out to you. I don't know, like something that kind of goes against that dynamic
Yeah,
you're
well,
talking about.
something that's happened recently is I've gotten to know Tim Bush,
Okay.
who's the head of the Napa Institute.
Mhm.
And he has started these, what he calls salon dinners,
Okay.
where he brings together people from different, say, theological backgrounds just to meet, which I think is wonderful.
Mm.
It's a kind of sort of mini synodality. And I help him get people, who might be more progressive, and they go to dinner at his houses, different places.
Yeah.
And it's just to meet one another. One of the most important quotes I heard was at the synod, which where we really struggled with this
Yeah.
because there were people from different theological bents, and it came from uh, later Cardinal Timothy Radcliffe. He was still just Father Timothy Radcliffe
Mhm.
at the time, who quoted St. John Paul II, who said, "I love this: affective collegiality precedes effective collegiality."
Mm. Okay.
Meaning,
Interesting.
if you're going to talk about difficult topics, right? And in the church, there are a lot of difficult topics. You have to be friends first.
Yeah.
And that really sort of changed the way I looked at the synod.
Mm.
It wasn't about debating. It was about, as Radcliffe said, first, it was about friendship. And so before we can talk to one another, we have to be friends. And that means being willing to listen to one another
Mm.
and just to break bread and just to, gather around the table, for the Eucharist. And that has helped me
Mm.
in the last couple of years. That one quote is really important for me. And it's true because
Yeah.
in the first session of the Synod in October 2023, for those who don't know, the Synod was this worldwide gathering of church representatives. It was about sort of getting to know one another. And
Yeah.
in the second session, it was a lot easier because we were friends and could laugh and joke. And even people that I really disagreed with,
Mm.
we were able to be friends and break bread. So I think that insight from St. John Paul is
Yeah.
key.
Mm. But on staying on this topic of finding unity
Hmm.
amidst division, I'm also very much interested in trying to build bridges across generational divides. And this is I recently talked to our new Archbishop here in New York, Archbishop Hicks, about um, in Manhattan, there are a lot of parishes that are drawing in the Zoomers, Gen Z. And I wrote something about this saying that as much as it's great that all these young people are finding faith, my fear is that if they're all flocking to the same parishes, then again, it's a silo
It's interesting.
of a bunch of young people.
Mm,
There's no interaction between the different
mm.
generations. And I'm currently working on a piece for America that's going to come out soon about the value of intergenerational dialogue. And I think, at least within the American church, a lot of this kind of generational conflict is shrouded around, these young people who are super zealous, very traditionalist, turned off to quote unquote boomer Catholicism, whatever they think the spirit of Vatican II is. Which I don't know. I have to say, like, as a younger millennial, I relate to some of their concerns, but I also see how they go way too far with the trad thing. And as much as, yeah, like, I may not find certain things that come from older generations of Catholics to be very tasteful, like I realize how much like I can't swear them off. Like again, number one, we're all part of the same body, but also like if you've been living longer than me, you have certain insights that I need that I can learn from. This is why I think like it's so crucial that we create spaces in the church for intergenerational dialogue to have disagreements, to talk about our different points of view, to learn from each other. Um, and so, I mean, the first thing I want to ask on this topic is, okay, so in the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, you have a lot of young people. I think a lot of young people who are attracted to the society because of the Pope, because of Francis. But needless to say, they come with their own perspective, their own experiences as younger people growing up in a kind of different society. I mean, how do you navigate the different perspectives that the younger Jesuits in formation are bringing into the society? How do you, I don't know, like how do you discuss these different experiences, different points of view, values you all bring to the table?
By respecting them. That's the first
Mm,
thing. I have a sort of a way of looking at this, which is if something brings someone closer to God,
mm,
then I should reverence that,
yeah,
right? If you are someone who goes to the Latin Mass, right, and goes to adoration and prays the rosary, all things that I do, right, from time to time. I love the rosary. I prayed the rosary at my mom's deathbed a couple of weeks ago, right? I love adoration, right? As I sometimes say to people, I'm more traditional than you might think.
yeah,
Um, if that's your way and that's the way that you find God, wonderful.
mm,
And I'm not going to in any way not reverence that. By the same token, speaking as a boomer, I'm 65 years old. If someone likes folk mass music, right? If I just did my mom's funeral at our parish outside of Philadelphia, which was built in the early 1960s, right? Epiphany
mm,
Parish. I love that architecture. For me, it's really meaningful. It's
mm,
simple, right? It's very stark, which I like. People might say, "Oh, it looks like whatever. It looks like a shopping center or something." If I find that as a way of encountering God, why would someone else disrespect it? So I think it's about respect.
yeah,
With the younger Jesuits, I think it's true that they're probably more traditional in terms of their desire for certain devotions. Fantastic. I mean, if you want to do the rosary every night, right? If
mm,
you want to go to adoration, if you want, great. I mean, so that's the key. I think the invitation is also for the younger Catholics to also feel the same way about
yeah,
older Catholics. I have to say, and I wrote an article about this a couple of years ago in America. I mean, there are certain parts of 1960s and 1970s Catholicism, which I know have been, categorized as beige Catholicism, and I
yeah,
can see you smiling
yeah.
stuff, which are really meaningful to me and which I loved.
See,
Some of
and
the,
that's the second thing I wanted to add to
yeah,
it. Like, because when you say folk masses and
yeah,
the 70s
yeah,
architecture, like I naturally cringe when I hear
sure.
it.
A lot of people do,
But
but
what am I,
like that's my childhood parish.
but explain it to me. Like, what am I not seeing there?
Well, I would say, I was like two when Vatican II happened, so
Yeah.
I didn't know what was going on. What are you missing? I would say the kind of simplicity of it. And if you think about what Jesus was
Yeah.
like with the disciples, it was probably pretty simple, straightforward. I think the it's hard to describe because it's like saying,
Hmm.
you grew up in this neighborhood, I wouldn't live there. Why did you like it? Well, this is part of how I was sort of raised, right? I don't like the food that your mom made, why would you
Hmm.
like this kind of Italian or Greek food?
Yeah.
So it's very sort of personal. But I would say there's a kind of
Hmm.
simplicity, there's a directness.
Yeah.
As we know after the Second Vatican Council, the idea was, in terms of the liturgy, full, active, and conscious participation. And I would say that you can debate it, but speaking your language, speaking the
Yeah.
vernacular, having it in English, I think does make it, for me, easier to participate in. Now, some might say it removes the mystery.
Yeah. So it's not to each their own. It's not anything goes. Um, Because, but the spirit works as the spirit chooses. We can't put it in a box.
You can't ration the spirit, right? As the New Testament says, you cannot put it in a box. And also, again, if you came to me and said, I love the Latin Mass and I find God there, I would
Mm,
say fantastic. If you came to me and said, I like Mass at the Catholic Worker in
hmm.
English around a coffee table, I would say fantastic. Because, I mean, the key, you can't say to someone, this is the way you should experience God. I mean, that's something I've learned as a Jesuit.
Mm.
So when younger Jesuits say, I might be more interested in traditional devotions, I say, great.
But this is why I think these conversations are so essential because I think number one, yeah, I mean, the spirit is going to choose to reach us as it chooses. But I also think like there have to be conversations about like there's a certain objective. I think some things are objectively better than others. Like when I see all these trads who go with their veils and they're kneeling and doing all the things, like there's something really beautiful about it, but a lot of people turn those traditions into an idol, and that is false. And that needs to be said. And I think the same way that like I see what you're saying about, the simplicity of certain church architectural styles, certain hymns. But I fear that yes, sometimes something it could be done in a way that is irreverent, and that is something that needs to be addressed. So it's like if we don't have these conversations and we don't, as you said, respect each other, listen to each other, we're just going to keep talking past each other.
I think that's
Yeah.
true. And I don't think there are a lot of conversations like that going on, unfortunately. Yeah, there are dangers on both sides, right? But there are dangers in all sorts
Yeah.
of practices. I think the biggest danger, though, for me is the judgmentalism
Yeah.
that you're not a real Catholic, or if you do it this way, whichever way it is, you're not a real Catholic. You're not serious.
Mm.
You're whatever. You're only looking at the surface.
Yeah.
And so that's really, to
Mm.
me, that's the scandal.
Okay.
So yeah, I take people where they are.
Yeah, but I think again, like if we don't have these conversations, just we're gonna keep dividing,
Well, and
you know?
that's your insight about having it generational,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because I think one generation, it's very easy to say, oh, this generation got it wrong or is getting it
Mm.
wrong.
And I think I mean, being part of a religious order like the Jesuits, like naturally you're gonna have people of all different ages. Not every Catholic is in a space like that. Like I said, some parishes are only older people, only younger people. Some, like I think this is why like we have to intentionally look for or foster those kinds of spaces within the
Well, and
church,
I think that's one reason the Jesuits have been so open. I mean, religious orders in general, not,
Mm,
uh, you know, last night at dinner, I was sitting with someone who was 85 and someone
mm,
who was in their 30s,
yeah,
right? And they had a lot, very different experiences and also different ways of looking at the church and different ways of looking at devotion. We have guys in our house that celebrate Mass very casually, right? And
mm,
not irreverently, but
yeah,
kind of casually. We have guys who are very precise, right? And follow it and follow the rubrics in a different way. They're both very reverent, and you have to really, I think as a Jesuit, you have to kind of get used to that,
yeah.
right? And
Mm,
I think that in a sense forces a kind of openness, which I think is good.
mm,
And it forces unity because we all know that we're all centered around the Eucharist and
yeah.
around Jesus, and for the Jesuits around the exercises too.
Mm. So I want to kind of wrap things up with a more lighthearted question.
Okay.
So every cracks and postmodernity event that we have, and a lot of our articles that we write, the name Camille Paglia gets dropped
Oh
very
my God.
often.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite interviews that she ever did was with you in America Magazine in the 90s.
95, I think.
What was that like talking to her?
It was fascinating. She was like talking to a fire hose. I mean,
Yeah,
it just
that's
sort of
it.
all came out. I think we did it, as I recall, over the phone way back when, and I think I transcribed it. I think to be honest,
Yeah.
not joking, I think that's one of the reasons I got carpal tunnel because I ended up getting
Oh, well,
carpal
yeah.
tunnel.
I mean, how fast she
It was
talks.
fun. I found her fascinating. She still is an important figure. But her books were just fascinating, and
Yeah.
her take on Catholicism to me was just
Yeah.
fascinating. So I loved it, and it was a big hit. I remember that was the cover story. I was a young Jesuit and got a lot of attention back then. It was fun.
Yeah.
She also didn't like
That's
1970s
exactly what I
Catholicism.
was
She
gonna
talked about,
say. She
a
hates it.
church looked like a barbecue pit,
Yeah. Yeah.
but that was her.
Wow. Yeah. No, I love citing that
Hmm.
interview. It was a great one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So, all right. So the last thing we're gonna do, we always like to play a game with our guests before
Okay.
we wrap up. So this is the first game we're gonna do. I'm gonna ask you for your favorite of each of the following
Okay.
categories.
These are fun.
So it's rapid fire. So
Sure.
don't think of it.
Okay.
Just say
All right.
whatever. All right. So favorite Catholic pop star?
Oh my gosh. Gosh. I guess Bruce Springsteen.
Okay, that counts.
Why wouldn't it count? He's Catholic,
He's
right?
Catholic,
He's
yeah.
not pop, I guess. He's more
He's
serious.
very
Okay,
popular. It
yeah.
counts. It
Okay.
counts. Favorite papal encyclical?
Wow. So
Hmm,
many.
don't think too much.
No, Pachamenteras.
Okay, John
Mhm.
the 23rd. Do you have a favorite rage tweet directed at you or something that was like not nice, but you thought was funny?
That's
Because
so
people are not
funny.
always nice.
Um, I'm called a demon a lot,
A
which I think is just
demon?
so over the top.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
that makes me laugh.
All right. Favorite church hymn?
Well, now I'll give you one from the 70s.
Okay.
Hear, O Lord,
Hero
Hear, O
Lord.
Lord, the sound of my call. It's quite beautiful.
Okay. And what's your favorite thing about New York City? Or favorite place in New York City?
Favorite thing, I would say the favorite thing about New York is that it feels like everything is happening within like a 10 block radius.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's exciting to
Okay.
me.
All right. So now last thing we'll do, dance battles. I'm gonna give you two
My
famous
gosh.
people. Who's gonna win?
Oh my gosh.
So we're gonna start staying on the pop star
You mean
theme.
who would be better dancer?
Yes, pretty
Uh-huh.
much.
Okay.
So Madonna or Gaga?
Oh my gosh. I don't think I've seen Gaga dance, so I would say Madonna.
Okay,
Well, I have seen dance.
fair. Benedict or Francis? The popes, not the
I
saints.
think Francis.
Yeah, correct.
Francis toward, before he was in the
Yeah.
wheelchair, obviously.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes. Mayor Mamdani or Mayor
Oh
Adams?
my gosh. I think Mayor Mamdani simply because he's younger.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
fair. Mayor
Bust a
Adams
move.
is getting tired. Paglia or fellow Italian
Oh
Nancy Pelosi?
my gosh. These are
I
crazy.
know.
Camille Paglia. Think a little more
Yeah,
free. And I
yes.
think Nancy Pelosi would be like a little worried, more worried
Yeah,
about her
well,
public image. Yeah.
probably. And the last one is going to be tied to your new podcast, Mayor Pete or Whoopi Goldberg.
I think Whoopi
Yeah,
Goldberg. Yeah.
I've seen Sister Act,
Yeah.
so
And I think Mayor Pete is pretty buttoned down.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But a nice guy.
So, Father James Martin, thank you so much for joining us. This was a very fun conversation,
My pleasure. Great to
and
be with you.
we suggest everyone picks up a copy of Work in Progress.
Go get it.
Awesome.
Thank you.